The organization, well, originally was called Direct Marketing Idea Exchange, and it was started over 40 years ago by a gentleman who was named Nat Ross, who was in the printing business, but retired to become a professor of marketing at NYU and started the first program designed to teach our art and science as originally an undergraduate program and then a master's program. So we've been around exchanging information, ideas, strategies for all that time, and meeting maybe 5 or 6 times a year to do so, and usually having a guest speaker. Now, in terms of the industries that are represented here, they include the data industry, companies like Alliant Data Services. We have a couple of the top executives from that firm. We're not going to talk about it in great detail. We have people who work in the consumer data business. Myles Megdal had his own firm called Marketing Information Technology. American Express was one of their major clients. He was merged with Experian and was the head of president of Experian Direct Marketing. We also have people...
Data analytics. Let's not get carried away.
I'm sorry?
Data analytics.
Data analytics.
Not direct marketing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Database marketing. Sorry. Bob DeSena was from formerly an executive at Time Inc. Publishing was one of the earliest and most influential users of direct marketing to market magazine subscriptions, to sell books directly to the public. Time, Life, music, and books were a mail order product. They were not even sold in stores. I'm not sure if you had anything to do with that business, but my dad, when he ran the Ogilvy and Mather direct marketing business before starting our own business, that was one of their major clients, along with American Express. We also have people here from publishing, trade publishing. I'm sorry, Ken Morris runs a business called Lightbulb Press. He's at the opposite end of the table from me, that specializes in investor education and financial education. We also have people from financial services. Scott Nevins is with Bernstein Wealth Management, which is part of Alliance Bernstein. Financial services is a big key part of our industry. So, I didn't mention everybody. We have people from academia. We have Deb Fain, who's a professor at Pace University and their marketing program. And I can't introduce everybody, but just the idea of diversity of what industries we come from. And then I just wanted to give an introduction in terms of what I hope we will be able to cover here. We have 3 really issues or crises, as I said in the publication, in the promotion. We have the issue of data breaches, which is theft of data. That was the original when we first booked the Congressman to appear in December, and there was a federal issue that prevented him from coming. The Equifax data breach was top of mind, and it seemed like there was a never-ending stream of data breaches. In fact, there still is, but they've become so commonplace that they're not even reported anymore. We pretty much know that our Social Security numbers are available to anyone who wants them, and we've had to work to secure our lives in some other ways. The second issue, which is more recently publicized, is the misuse of data. The idea that the trust we have placed in Facebook and other organizations that use our data, personal data, for marketing purposes, may or may not have been violated, but people certainly feel violated. And then thirdly, there's the reaction to this lack of trust in the crisis of data regulation, where, as we all know, and as we're going to look at some data, GDPR disclosures that are coming out. We're all getting new data privacies notices as a result of the European regulation, but who knows what's going to happen next, whether it's in Europe or in the US in terms of regulation. So that's really the setup for this. And we have a bunch of questions. We don't expect the Congressman to give us a 40-minute lecture on what he's doing as ranking member of the NSA and Cybersecurity Subcommittee, and someone from the financial services industry, having worked at Goldman Sachs before you were became a U.S. Congressman. But we have a expert panel that Myles is leading, along with Bill Harvey and perhaps Bob DeSena. Since you're part of the group there, maybe you'll ask a few questions too. So I'm going to leave it to Myles to ask questions and lead into what we're going to talk about.
Thank you, Peter. It's going to be a little bit informal. I don't like prepared speeches, those of you who know me well. Just looking around the room here, and I realized that when I first got into this business, privacy concerned taking you off your mailing list, the do not call list, and eventually email list, and that was about it. That was the extent of privacy control. When Peter first broached this subject as a potential for the panel, and he said, I want to talk about fraud, and I want to talk about privacy, and misuse of data, and I said, well, it's kind of hard to separate them. Basically, there are a lot, in my opinion, a lot of factors that are going on right now, and just generally in the world, that make the job of privacy and associated fraud basically well nigh impossible. Like, I have a little question here to ask of the audience. How many of you in the audience are rigorous around your software upgrades? You get your little notice, upgrade Windows 10, upgrade this, upgrade that. I mean, show of hands. I know I get them constantly, right? How many of those people do you mostly do the upgrades?
Yes.
You
for
do?
Security reasons, yes.
That's the point.
Yeah.
If you take a look at what those security messages are, it's about 80 to 90% of them are fixing problems in the software that allow people to hack into your data. Well,
Because the hackers never sleep.
They're all related to security breaches. So one of the things I think is kind of interesting, people think they're protected, and yet you're virtually not protected. Now, a lot of that has to do with just the technology world today. It's so important to get product and software releases out to the consumers that a lot of them are not properly debugged. If some of you who are like old-timers like me can go back 40 years and look at some of the software, I mean, you were lucky to get 2 upgrades a year from your software supplier. Now, I mean, I'm getting Windows updates, Windows 10 updates that will last 6 hours. You tell them you got to run them at night. And I'm running on, a next order of computing, a NUC, which is a very, very powerful sort of Intel device, originally designed for AV applications, but it happens to be a very, very powerful processor if you want to play. So you have this one thing going on in our world right now, which is technology is so advanced that the ability to fully protect the consumer from themselves is well nigh impossible when it comes to software. You can do a lot, but brings me to my second point, which is the consumer. One of the biggest issues with privacy is the consumer themselves. Because for 2 reasons. Number one is we've been Pavlovianly conditioned to basically use technology to its maximum extent. And you get all these free apps are very helpful, and if you read the disclaimers, those free apps are basically taking away your right to own your own data. Someplace buried in there. I showed Peter earlier, since the GDPR regulations started being adopted overseas, almost every company in the United States that's starting to deal with the GDPR is issuing new consumer privacy regulations. Well, I got one a week and a half ago from Nest, where I use their cameras and stuff to basically monitor my houses if I'm not around. So I took a read through it. Now, ready for this, folks? It's 21 pages long. You basically surrendered everything, including your firstborn, by the time you finished it. They have no liabilities any place except where really specifically identified, and they haven't adopted the GDPR language yet. And they state that. So, we have this issue with technology that makes privacy and fraud easier. We have this issue with consumers, and one aspect is they're not astute enough to know what they're doing. Now, I'm a dual resident. I live in New York, I live in Florida, part of the year. It's interesting, in New York, I'll see very little in the way of public service advertising that says, be aware of these following frauds. In Florida, it's about 20% of the public service. All right, now, brings me to this, that part of our issue is a demographic issue. Population is getting older. They're becoming not technologically astute. They are more susceptible to cons and frauds. Protecting them from themselves is a challenge, but actually may be an easier challenge than trying to get companies to protect the consumers themselves. But we can't ignore that, whether it's legislation or software. The fact that we are running, basically, I think the population is splitting upon two lines. Those that tend to be not savvy about technology and privacy, tend to be older demographic, maybe a little bit less affluent. And you have an emerging younger population, which I'll claim my 31-year-old daughter to be a member of, where her entire life revolves around any communication that you can get electronically. And I'm surprised that we haven't lost the skill to read yet, because you're getting your information from those electronic channels. So you have technology on one hand, you have a consumer population that's right, and what I'd like to, for us to discuss today as a group, because this is an interactive session, if you believe it, I believe it's interactivity, is what do you think are the most critical components to your business or your way of thinking? How do we get around it? Now, I'm not a big fan of legislation. Having worked at Experian for 10 years before I decided to leave large corporate life, I realized that anything we try to do from a legislative standpoint, no offense, Congressman, I'm not trying to belittle the power of the government, it's just by the time they get around to moving, it's been circumvented to a large extent. So, what can we start to think about doing? Either advising our clients, implementing within our own businesses, things that can be done to help protect consumers' privacy with the knowledge, and I think this, Peter and I had this discussion, with the knowledge that some businesses, you've released complete information that they can use to their heart's content, most notably the cable companies. Once you have a customer relationship with the cable companies, they have the right to use your program, and they have the right to use it for selecting advertising. They can integrate, if you use them as their ISP, they can integrate their ISP data with their broadcast data and take it all together to paint a gorgeous little picture of who you are. So my daughter asked me one day, why am I not on Facebook? I said, for the same reason I'm not on LinkedIn or any other social media. Because the more people know about you as an individual, the more likely you are susceptible to identity theft and subsequent fraud. So we have this wonderful world where Facebook wants us to get together, and yet the more we get together, the more vulnerable we become. And with that, should I turn it over to the Congressman?
Well, I think that would be great, since we invited him here, we should ask him. We do not know, I do not know, to what extent your committee or Congress as a whole is involved in moves to regulate data privacy and data security, or whether that's left to the regulatory agencies like the Consumer Financial Protection Control Board. So I have no idea how that fits into Congress and what you do.
Yeah, fair enough. Maybe I'll just try to paint the picture for 4 or 5 minutes here. I am the lead Democrat on the Cybersecurity and NSA subcommittee, the Intelligence Committee. So that means my focus tends to be abroad. Bad actors, country, sovereigns or non-sovereigns who are attacking our networks, who are stealing our data, and a little bit less on domestic privacy protections, although I get involved in that as well because NSA, of course, whether it's through Section 215 metadata collection or Section 702 internet behavior collection, email, digital collection, obviously captures U.S. person information. So let me just throw a couple of ideas on the table in order to keep it brief, because I'm not sure which will be most interesting. But starting outside the country and then moving in, and you should know, as a member of Congress, I'm not a data expert, I'm not a network expert. I am a former banker who now spends a lot of time thinking about these issues because my constituents care a lot about them. But just to start outside the country, there is a lot of work that we need to do to reduce the threat from sovereign actors. So this tends to be China, North Korea, Iran, the Russians, who are just spending an awful lot of time and energy trying to find the vulnerabilities in our networks, largely for the purposes of if they ever found themselves in a conflict with us, they could know those vulnerabilities and act antagonistically in the cyber world. Now, we're doing the same thing. We have been a lot less offensive about it than other countries have been. There's a front page article in the New York Times today about how Cyber Command is now sort of, they're loosening the chains a little bit, and there may be more aggressive activity against our enemies, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think we're actually particularly vulnerable right now because the Russian hack of our election went largely unanswered, and I think it's a better and safer world if our foes have some sense of our capabilities. And I'm not saying we should have done anything stupid in response to the Russian attack on our election, but it wouldn't have been bad, and you can sort of pick your non-lethal alternative. It wouldn't have been bad if we'd used that moment to really demonstrate the capabilities of people in places like tailored access operations. Well, there's a lot of, sure, dim the lights, I always, my own favorite would be, the Russian system survives because you've got 3 dozen or so oligarchs around. It wouldn't have been fun if for a week they'd had 0 balances in their Swiss bank accounts or whatever. Again, non-lethal, but just to demonstrate I think it's an unsafe world where our foes don't understand our offensive capabilities. Moving inward here, that may be something that's a little bit more germane to direct marketers. We have a lot of work to do, yes, with the consumer. People say, well, what can the government do to better protect privacy and identity? Well, probably all we can do is to use our huge footprint to get people to stop downloading attachments from Nigerian princes, or to stop not using two-factor authentication. I mean, it's just so much blocking and tackling that can be done that is really pretty simple that would radically improve the safety of our data and of our networks if people just acted more responsibly than they are. Gartner did a study where they looked at basically all of the cyber attacks, both commercial and non-commercial, and there really are almost never 0-day attacks. That is to say, stuff that you've never seen before. And as a consequence, smart people can that update their software, that do these patches, can defend against most of what's out there. So we have a lot of work to do, I think, in that realm, getting people to act responsibly. Number 2, there's a lot of learning, and here's where I do get into an area of some expertise, because my job basically consists of interacting intensely with some subset of my 750,000 constituents. And the issue of data security and privacy, we have a long way to go to get to a place where my constituents, frankly Americans anywhere, really know what's going on. And companies in this space and marketers, they need to choose a full disclosure transparency approach to this. There are business models, I hope I don't offend anybody in this room, but there are business models that rely on an absence of transparency and simplicity. Cell phone billing plans, cable packages, I could go on. But my point is that when you're talking about an individual's behavior online, you better make sure they really understand the implications of their actions, which they don't today. Not only do people not read the privacy agreements, most people don't even scroll through the Facebook various toggles and everything. And I think it's on companies, if they want to avoid a backlash, to present in a really friendly way, you know, one page, bunch of toggles, here's what we do, here's how we do it. It goes without saying that once they say that, they should abide by those regulations. I'm looking at you, Facebook, you know, and not violate the agreements. But the third thing, and I'll just close on the consumer element of this, the third thing consumers need to learn and understand is, you know, it's a shock to many of my constituents to learn that, what is that famous phrase about Facebook, you know, if you don't quite know what the product is, you are the product. And it's just suddenly occurring to lots of Americans, you people live in this world, it's occurring to lots of Americans that the shopping behavior and other online behavior has value, and that value is why you get Facebook and Google for free. And I sometimes will encourage those companies to say, make sure people understand that, because if it's just about giving away a lot of data, that is inherently an uncomfortable thing. But if I give away that data in exchange for really valuable free services, whatever they might be, that now Americans who are pretty pragmatic lot kind of get it. And by the way, there's alternative business models. You know, I don't know if it's still true, but I lived in England 20 plus years ago, and you know, in England they had a different model for how to deliver television, right? You bought a television and then you bought a $200 television license, and then you could turn on your television. Well, that's because the BBC didn't have an advertising-based model. So I sometimes will encourage, and they won't do it, but I say, look, you got to get people understanding this. Tell folks, fine. You know, Google and Facebook or Comcast or whoever won't look at any of your stuff. Here's your $350 monthly bill, because obviously these things cost money. That's a little bit facetious, of course, but the point is that will cause people to understand that they, you know, if you want all of these supposedly free services, there has to be a transfer of value going in the other direction. So I think we have a lot of work to do abroad. You know, we need to be smarter about letting our adversaries know what we're capable of doing. By the way, to be non-adversarial, we should also really, and I get into long discussions about this, we really need what I like to call, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, an ENEVA convention, right? Where we look at the Russians and the North Koreans and the Iranians, and we say, here's what we do, and here's what we don't do. We don't shut down hospitals, we don't, you know, and, you know, this is not a crazy idea. We have the laws of armed conflict, we have the Geneva Conventions that we observe even with people that we don't like, and of course they're often broken, but the point is they exist and there's some consensus, so we need to do that. We need to train consumers to be smarter about things like software patches and what it really means to be interacting and giving data online. And just to close with the point that's perhaps most relevant in the room, there's nothing inherently bad about using data to market to people, but it will rely, I think consumer and American acceptance of this will really rely on a fully transparent, simple, easy to use interface with marketing services, with online services. And quite frankly, look, it may be surprising to hear this coming from a Democrat, but as a father of 2 daughters, I also have a fundamental principle that ought to penetrate people's heads, which is, you know, look, if it's really that private to you and you don't want to get out there, don't put it online. You know, don't put it on Facebook. So that grows increasingly harder as our life evolves online, but it is still a consumer option that I think people need to be reminded of.
Thank you.
Have to swallow, thank you. I mean, I could talk with a full mouth, but the results are not pretty. One point that I think we should discuss is the concept of personally identifiable versus non-personally identifiable data. All right? Facebook has both. What Facebook has that is generally used is non-PII. They don't know it's Myles, they don't know it's Tom, they don't know it's Bob. What they know is it's some ID.
Whose definition are you using? Because you use Europe's definition.
I'm using currently with Facebook really has 2 types. One is non-PII, yes, I'm not using the GDPR yet. It's non-PII, and part of it is PII, but you've given theoretically permission to those people to know who you are. All right? This happens in a lot of different business applications where you have both PII data and non-PII data. I think they have to be treated somewhat similarly, but somewhat differently, because a lot of that data is used, let's say I'll be euphemistic about it and say it's being used for the consumer's benefit. You know, when somebody once said, you know, you have all this data, you model this data, and you predict who should see what ads and should do what. Well, you can make it, one point is that all of that information is being used to inundate the consumer with too much communication. Another point of view is it's only relevant communication because it's based on a viewing pattern. Not a viewing pattern necessarily for Peter, but for Peter's ID. I think good time to have Bill talk a little bit more. And I do agree that the rules and regulations are changing. But right now, there's still a very interesting split into what people consider to be personally identifiable information versus non-personally identifiable information. Bill?
Thanks, Myles. And let me start by agreeing with the Congressman on his recommendations. They both seem eminently sensible. In fact, I was going to bring one of them up. You know, the thing that we all agree to on the internet when we're asked to sign up, be on a website, or join a community, is known as the EULA, E-U-L-A. And it's the mechanism which is the least transparent in practice. From a practical standpoint, it's a way of saying, here's a lot of mouse print. You could avoid it and just agree right now. And that's what 99.9% of the time happens. So by taking a simple one-page approach, as the Congressman has just recommended, I think it's a great idea. Let me go back in time a little bit, because I'd like to share with you my experiences in the privacy arena. It started in the mid-90s. The CEO of Procter & Gamble, Ed Arts, had become concerned about the movement toward a more technological media landscape. And he was specifically concerned about the possibility that it wouldn't be an advertising-friendly landscape. So he asked the industry to create a committee, which was called the Coalition for Advertiser-Supported Information and Entertainment, CASIE, CASE. And I was one of the people who was asked to serve on that committee, so I did. And I remember the first meeting very clearly. We sat at a table much like this, a group approximately this size, and we wondered what we were supposed to do. And we talked about creating definitions. Maybe that would be a good place to start. That seemed to me like a big waste of time. So I said, you know, I was already interested in the idea of set-top box data. I was already working in the field of developing set-top box data and targeted advertising, addressable commercials, as I called it. And I wanted to be sure that we were doing something about privacy. So I said, why don't we create the Casey privacy principles? And the head of the committee said, great idea, Bill. You do it, we'll help you. So that turned into over 20 drafts, where I would draft something, and then people would agree and disagree on practically every word. Then I would try to smash it all together in some fair way. We went through that over 20 times. But eventually, on the sites of the Association of National Advertisers, the 4As, and the Advertising Research Foundation, the Casey principles appeared and stayed up there for years. They were. Could you put that slide up?
Yes.
My first step back up. So there were, to boil it down, there were 8 main principles. And the first one was about consumer permission. Whether you used opt-in, which I consider to be the holy, gold standard, or whether you used opt-out, which is what most of the cable industry decided they wanted to do, and I went along with it happily. One way or the other, there had to be permission given for the use of the consumer's data, set-top box data or any other kind of data. The second principle was that it had to be used anonymously. It couldn't be tied back to that individual. You couldn't go and embarrass a congressman for watching porn. That had already happened. They didn't want it to happen again. Nobody wanted that to happen. Therefore, the data wouldn't actually be released on a home-by-home basis. It would be aggregated. And certain companies, like a company I created called TRA, would learn how to get the data on a non-PII basis, household by household, aggregate it, still on obviously non-PII basis, and sell it. Then there was the question about the right to see one's own data. Then there was the question about the right to edit one's own data, to correct flaws found in the data to a degree that would make it really authentic and sincere. Often it's just to cover up advertising and nothing else. But it could be extended to actually bring relevant information to people, which would be a good thing. And my company, Next Century Media, tried to do that with a personalized program recommender back in the 90s. Don't sell the consumer's data without explicit permission, so that if you collect the data and you're never going to sell it to other direct marketers, it wasn't prohibited, but it should be something where the consumer has another right to give permission or not on that. And then finally, to avoid the use of mouse print, to make all of this stuff really accessible. Well, the EULA has kind of gotten around that. For the most part, though, if you look at where the industry is as a result of the Casey principles and as a result of the self-regulation by these kinds of principles, we've only had, to my knowledge, I mean, there's a lot of data breaches, but there's only been 2 terrible situations that have occurred in the last 20 years as a result of self-regulation. One was in the early 00s when a company called NYAC teamed up with some cable operators and said, we're going to allow you to insert advertising. If you're the cable modem, you should have the right to get a piece of the pie. So we'll make it possible for you to insert some ads around the fringes, or even do whole page takeovers. And we'll follow the self-regulations that the industry has adopted. But the way they did it, there were 2 flaws. One was mouse print, and the other one was opt-outs only lasted a month, and then you were automatically opted in again until you opted out again. So that company quickly went out of business.
Why did they go out of business then? Because they're a crummy company, or because, I mean, self-regulation only works if there's some sort of body that's enforcing this. Like, DMA, for instance, they have self-regulatory principles that we all abide by, but it doesn't work.
Well, only the people who belong to the MA.
No, don't
no,
repeat
that's not
that.
true.
That's not true. They go after everybody.
Well, I mean,
bring
These
any
are
case.
complaints, we're investigating.
But
Yeah.
unlike the securities industry, which is by far not totally well policed, you're not allowed to sell securities unless you are licensed by FINRA, and you have to go through a licensing process. And if you violate the terms of the law, the license can be taken away. There's no license to do marketing in America. Yes, our trade association can go after you, but that doesn't stop people from marketing all sorts of disreputable things and simply avoiding the police and associations.
I don't think I agree with you.
I don't agree with you either. So I think that we have trust marks in this business that if you're not following and you get a reputation, no one's going to put you in their ad supply chain. That certainly is true in the digital world. So I really challenge you on the point of view that our trade associations do not enforce and investigate non-members. They do, or run alongside members. And Rick, I mean, are you on ethical business practice? Yeah, I mean, hello, these things happen all the time. And there are ramifications. Now, I agree that without enforcement, they're just, principles.
Right.
But you have to have an enforcement arm, whether it's through peer regulation, self-regulation, or
Yeah, I
in
think
some instances,
self-regulations work
co-regulation
very well.
with government. I mean, the FTC loves it.
You guys are saying you conflate privacy with data security.
Yeah, that's not the
Those are two different
distinct
things.
security. Well, security, I would argue, is a subset of privacy.
Yeah,
But it
and,
is
you know,
a
and
very,
then there's the
I'm
whole
interested to
question
hear
of,
what the second violation is.
you're out in the world, and you're, now we would call it data laws, right? Now, I'm looking at this, so don't sell. I mean, they've been selling mailing lists since.
Don't sell without permission.
Without permission.
Yeah, yeah.
Come on. I mean, did anybody who ever bought Time magazine think they were giving permission to, you know, I mean, did anybody
If
who
you
ever?
subscribe to it, you do.
Well, you did, but, you know, you weren't
If you
sitting there
didn't
going,
subscribe to it, they
you
don't
had
know
no
who you
idea,
are.
you had no idea what the quote-unquote mailing list industry was. You knew you were gonna get direct mail. It was just part of the deal. It's the same with the
It's part of the
catalog.
education, but
You
don't
buy
say
it
that they
from a
didn't, they were not informed.
No, I
Anybody who
understand,
pays
but you know,
or
they were informed by
subscribes-
mouse type, because it's somewhere in, you know, in that, in all the stuff you got, you know, it presumably you opted into something.
Not arguing with that, I'm just saying that people have given permission, and I mean, it goes back to the thing, I mean, you need a more concise statement of when you sign up to anything, of how your data is going to be used and under what circumstances. I mean, I have to bring along, this is the privacy statement from Nest, it goes into every possible.
This is for your thermostat.
Yeah, this is for thermostat. How your privacy stay should be done, how are minors handled, how does Nest protect my personal information when it's transferred internationally? What choices do I have and how do I delete my personal information? 21 pages of
Well, you know,
this.
it's.
But who's gonna read it?
It's not necessarily ridiculous, because there have been a number of stories in the press about how devices such as Wi-Fi connected light bulbs, for example, can be hijacked or hacked to help people do bad things, bad actors do bad things. So there is some justification for attention to these thermostats or whatever. But I think there's a bigger issue here involved in this. Do we like what Europe is doing, or do we want to avoid regulation and rely on our ethical businesses and trade associations to protect us?
Could I jump in on that?
Yeah.
I'm totally in agreement that what we've been doing to protect the consumer so far has been working well. That was my point, that in 20 years there's only been Cambridge Analytica and Nebula. And that's a sign that,
That's what we know of.
Yeah,
We know it.
yeah,
well, for you guys, let's be honest, I'm here today because I want to protect data flows for advertising purposes. Europe has taken a one-size-fits-all approach for all types of data and uses. We, believe it or not, I want to change the narrative, we have a superior data regimen in this country. We look at harm and we regulate based on that. We have the Fair Credit Reporting Act because we have to protect credit information. We have, from harm, HIPAA is to protect health data. We have a sectoral approach to regulation that is superior to what Europe is doing. We need a government who can articulate that, because the benefits that come from data flows that are unhindered, there's a reason why Silicon Valley is in the United States of America, because we use data for responsible, economic, beneficial use. And those flows are largely unhindered, except where there is demonstrable harm. And we have had a smart public policy approach articulated by the FTC and FCC and others over years that needs to be recognized and emphasized right now. Because if we fall into the GDPR trap, we are shutting ourselves down economically. That vote in Europe is not close. What is closer than you think? There are lots of European publishers that are struggling. Europe also wants to fight to keep diversity on the internet, and they want to keep competition. Well, how do you think that happens? That happens through data flows. They're going to be eating their lunch sooner than later, and we need to make sure that we're presenting a model. By the way, and the rest of the world is watching too. I mean, I just had the Argentina, we just expanded our program in Argentina, and the Data Protection Commissioner there does not want a GDPR-style law in Argentina. He wants to do a more co-regulated Canadian approach. That's a very helpful, we need these types of voices to be put out there, and I really feel if Congress was doing its job, there would have been a hearing on the Equifax breach On day one, that should have been what everybody was tuned into and watching, because that is security. That's a big issue. That first Equifax should have that stuff under Fort Knox, and that stuff should be, where's that data gonna go? It's gonna be funding terrorism, it's gonna be funding, God knows what.
Yeah.
Those are the real issues. The fact that I got a fake ad is a concern from political lab, but
Well, I actually agree with you, even though I posed a point of view that set you off.
yeah, sorry.
But here's what I believe. I believe that the issue of data theft and data misuse, while they're separate issues, in the mind of the consumer, they come together. And there's at least two different kinds of consumer mindsets out there. You have the millennial mindset, like my kids, especially the ones who work in the tech industry, who believe that the real problem is Big Brother. Big Brother government telling tech industry what to do, intellectual property law trying to patent what should be open source. All this Big Brother stuff, they're against. So when you talk about the Equifax data breach, they say, well, that's because Big Brother is involved and big corporations are involved in it, and if everything were really decentralized, none of that would happen. On the other side, you have older people who are petrified. The older you get, I think they're talking about Florida as a great example. But I have a 90-year-old father-in-law who has a fair amount of retirement savings, and he is petrified. Not anymore. He is petrified of even things that we all think is just fine, sending a wire transfer from PIAA crap to Fidelity, where he's going to open a bank account. He doesn't want to do it, but money's been sitting in his account for 5 weeks now. We haven't convinced him to do anything about it. What fuels the paranoia is that we have so many security flaws, and a lot of them are things that might be stopped by a little stronger security culture in this country. In talking about Europe, for 20 years, you go to a restaurant in Europe, and you don't give your credit card to a waiter who takes it away where he or she can take a picture of it. You get a portable point-of-sale terminal brought to your table, you insert the machine, and in the case of a European card issuer, you type in a PIN. That means if you drop the card on the street, it's a little harder for the person picking it up to go to a restaurant and buy something, or make an online purchase where you have to put a PIN in. We've been lazy about that because we say, oh, well, the merchants will take a hit, the lines will be longer at checkout, they'll have to buy new machines, we don't want to do it. I think because we've had a lazy security culture, there's more casual theft. And I also think that there's the culture of, thieves are always a lot smarter and faster than the people figuring out how to stop them. We're always a step ahead. So, talk about Experian. When you go and want to open an account to check on your credit file, the way they authenticate you, aside from asking your social security number, is they ask you a bunch of questions that theoretically things that only you know. What previous addresses have you lived at? What's your mortgage size? Well, all these things are things that now you can look up online. Someone looks up my name, they find out all my previous addresses, they know my family members, and they know what size my mortgage is. It's all public information or information that's easy to find out. I just found that out. I was going to show this online. But I was trying to send a thank you note to my cousin who let me stay in her house in the East End of Long Island. And so I knew her address in Manhattan, but I didn't know the apartment number. So I go online, I type in her address and her name. Well, I know not only her apartment number, but when she bought the apartment, how long she's owned it for, how much her mortgage is, what her previous apartments were in that building and the previous building, and the other members of her family. anything that could authenticate them. So I think we are lazy about how we protect
Where did that information come from?
public records.
So somebody took the time to gather that information.
But the consumer has no way to protect against that.
Some instances, I think it'd be good, just to sort of take a stop, maybe it's a good idea for Bill to just say, what's new about the
Okay.
GDPR?
Okay, fine.
Then we can get back to the discussion.
The GDPR has not actually
Yes.
added any new principles. The right to portability of data is really an extension of the right to see the data. The right to erasure is an extension of the idea of the right to edit the data. What they have added, though, are punishments, consequences that befall you if you do something bad, plus additional costs in the form of having to hire people, some of whom will be probably highly paid lawyers, to assess risks. Not that that's a bad idea. Most U.S. companies have already assigned a chief privacy officer. Typically, it's somebody who has another job: chief engineer, chief information officer, chief technical officer, chief operations officer. So some of this is catching up with what we're doing here in the U.S., but there is more of an emphasis on penalties. Now, what has already happened as a result of the GDPR, even though it's not a U.S. law, is that both Google and Facebook have taken steps which are not good from the standpoint of direct marketers. Google is no longer allowing its post-evaluation data at the household level to be matched to other data for the purpose of measuring ROI attribution. And Facebook has kicked off third-party data. So if an advertiser brings their own first-party data, they can use it for targeting. But if you're in the CPG business, you can't use IRI or Nielsen or Shopcom. If you're in the automotive business, you can't use Polk or Experian Auto or JD Power. That's already happened, even though it didn't. The law is not a law of our country.
You sure about that?
I'm sure about that. So
It's specific towards those entities, but those are rules that they want to enforce. So it's not a regulation as much as it's a corporate policy.
What's them trying to adjust to a world regime?
Yeah, it's a knee-jerk reaction to
But it's also,
bad press.
the GDPR is going to strengthen the duopoly, the very thing that Europeans claim they want to go after.
I wanted to give the Congressman a chance to get in a word edgewise, because we certainly are an interactive group, and we don't all agree on things, and it's obviously a big issue for us. But any comments on either the privacy side or what government is doing to make us a harder target for any kind of malfeasance?
On the privacy side, the domestic internal data privacy side, so in other words, the analog to the GDPR, not much has happened. There's ideas out there, and a lot of my colleagues will rage as they have against Facebook and the duopoly. I'm not quite sure who you meant by the duopoly, but
Facebook and Google.
Yeah. So and there is this sense, and there's a lot of interesting discussions happening, after hours around how do you think about antitrust in a world where the product for the potential trust-oriented business is free. It's sort of an interesting, almost academic question. And obviously, Google and Facebook, they're subject to network effects, or they rely on network effects. So there's a lot of almost quasi-academic thinking, but no real action. No, there really is not likely to be any commercially oriented privacy legislation out of the U.S. Congress anytime in the next, let's call it 18 to 24 months, maybe 12 to 18 months. There's
good
election. Yeah, no, there's just nothing there. Now there is, and this I think is less interesting to the conversation. It's generally quite interesting, but less interesting to the conversation. There is always an ongoing push and pull between to what I think of Big Brother, not so much the commercial entities, but the federal government. So there, I made reference to metadata collection and NSA 702 collection. That's an ongoing discussion because those authorities tend to sunset. So every 4 or 5 years, we're going to have that discussion. You kind of hope they happen without being sullied, if you would. You want citizens thinking smart about what the difference is between NSA holding an email they sent and Facebook knowing the advertising that they looked at. So you're going to see ongoing discussion around that. And at the municipal and state level, there's all sorts of really interesting issues, which again aren't, I think, immediately interesting to the room. We're going to get a Supreme Court decision on location finding devices and these license plate readers. You've all read the stuff. Who holds that data and who can access it. So there's going to be a lot of that. But I can say with some confidence that for 12, perhaps as much as 24 months, you're just not going to see meaningful centralized regulation imposed by the federal government. Now, that may be bad, by the way. So for example, breach disclosure.
Yeah.
Every state is coming up with their own.
We
breach
would like a
disclosure.
data, probably, this room would probably argue for a national data breach standard.
Yeah, and I think you'll eventually get one, but there's a lot of, California always wants to do what California wants to do, and that takes off
Speaking of
Wyoming.
which, when you get a moment, I'd love to hear your comments about the
Ballot
proposition.
initiative?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
proposition, California's privacy proposition.
I've got some.
Yeah, I'd love to hear some more about that.
Anyway,
Sorry.
So that's the one, I think, one meaningful thought I can contribute. This
Do
is
you think
very
that
much an ongoing.
data breach regulation will ever, is that in any sort of time frame that you can see?
I do think we'll get to a federal standard eventually. Again, it's not going to be in 12 months. But it just there's an argument for why property and casual insurers should be regulated by state commissions. Florida has different P&C issues than Connecticut does. There's really no argument for why a company that has their servers in Belgium and headquarters in California and consumers everywhere shouldn't be subject to one regime. So it will happen, just I wouldn't say soon.
Would the state attorneys general have a different view? I mean, California does have a different look than New York.
Yeah, no, of course they will. And the politics will be pretty predictable. New York and California will want something far more stringent than the federal government will pass. So the way to deal with that, of course, is like we do with air quality regulations. Set a federal floor and let states. That'll be uncomfortable, but that's probably politically how it gets there.
You see it as a stepping stone, security as the sine qua non, then privacy as the next step?
Well, so when you use the word security, I think about network security. You mean
Data breach, network
identity theft?
security, I find to be kind of the essential building blocks to have privacy. If you've got Equifax, you can't have privacy. If you have data and no breach notice that applies to companies when they can make a reasonable determination that there was a breach, you can't have privacy. So I think security is really the most important foundation of that. I think everyone here would agree that a unified standard would be fantastic.
Yeah, again, sadly, I'm here to represent a pretty dysfunctional legislature. So, I wouldn't expect, really hard-fought, thoughtfully created security regime to come out of Washington. It's more likely to occur in the courts as courts settle issues of liability. And it is interesting. I mean, I agree. I agree with your broader point that it generally works, but I think the financial services sector has really been at the vanguard of this, thinking for obvious reasons. But other retailers and others are going to have to keep up, because I think what's going to keep them honest is not going to be legislation, but legal liability.
And so does your committee, Congressman, on an ongoing basis, have interaction with people who are very knowledgeable on the topic, such as what you're doing today, that you bring experts in on an ongoing basis?
Sure. I mean, again, my committee is outward focused. We look abroad. It's the intelligence committee, like the armed forces committee, would be more about what happens abroad. We worry a lot more about Iran and North Korea and China and the EULA than we we do about the proverbial 400-pound guy on his bed in New Jersey or whatever the president said. That's more the Judiciary and the Energy and Commerce Committee. But yes, they do. They bring in experts. Yeah.
I mean, the FBI has a whole cybersecurity, they actually have a resource for businesses to help them fight, identify, isolate fraud, and protect yourself against it. And I appreciate the efforts that our government does to allow the private sector to use information for responsible use, but limit and just debate healthfully what the public sector has access to. A lot of the issues we face in Europe with the parliamentarians there is they've conflated this U.S. government, data collection to private sector data collection, and they think it's all one big happy database that we all just share around here.
There is an issue that hurts us in this field, which is security is going to work best when we really have real-time interaction between our CISOs and people at NSA, DHS, and FBI and Secret Service, which is where the smarts live in the federal government. If you're at NSA, you have visibility into the things that no matter how good the JP Morgan guy, and when we did the legislation 3 or 4 years ago, there was huge concern, and I think misplaced. I'll probably draw some disagreement around this. There was a world where NSA and DHS and FBI are interacting in very rapid, real-time basis with the private sector really got hurt by an almost obsession with the idea that, say, JP Morgan used to stick with that example, conveying a piece of malware to the Homeland Security would convey PII. And I noticed with my own constituents, I think generally speaking, Americans have it wrong. I am as uncomfortable as anybody with U.S. person information in an NSA database, but it's a lot safer there than it is at Equifax or Walmart. And the number of, libertarians will disagree with me, but I have real visibility into this. The number of misuses or mistakes or dumb things that are done with data that the federal government holds are infinitesimal compared to what I think happens in the commercial world.
I got a breach notice from OPM, but
There's things I agree with your point earlier that, there's privacy and security are related, but they're not the same thing. And as it relates to what you said earlier, I also have 2 daughters, and I consistently ask them, why are you putting that on Facebook? Why don't you just put your mother's photo up there on maybe for everybody to see? Oh, no, it's just my friends can see it. Yeah, right. So there's a lot of issue around here, but the ultimate arbiter, I have found over a long period of time, the ultimate arbiter of all of this is the consumer. Andy Grove, years and years ago, did one of the greatest brand strengthenings of all time. There was a little chip they put out, and a little an obscure professor, I don't mean obscure in that sense, but in Virginia, he found a flaw in the chip. He did some very, very esoteric calculation, and there was like a 0.00000 mistake. So, dear Andy Grove recalled all the chips, cost them tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars, and strengthened that brand. The brand equity got so much stronger because that company showed what kind of integrity was behind the brand. Ultimately, that is the single biggest strength of a brand, which is a promise, right? What's a brand? A brand is a promise. Here's a brand. What do you think of when you see Coca-Cola or M&M's or any Nike or any other brand? It's a promise. There's a perceptual space that it occupies. It says, if I buy this product or service, this is what it's going to deliver. And if they violate that in any way, whether it be data or anything else, their brand is going to be irreparably damaged. And that ultimately is I think the ultimate, or I think you can pass regulations or legislation that would be stronger than the consumer saying, I'm not doing that anymore, because they violated my trust. So in the end, consumer protection is self-fulfilling, but I have a great bad feeling what Peter said about millennials, and that is they don't want privacy. They're used to a world where it's not a big deal to them. And I don't think they've been hurt by it so far. Technology, Congressman, you heard the story recently about Alexa. Picked up a conversation and emailed it to somebody in their, from the kitchen, and emailed it to folks on their contact list. Technology can do things that we can't even anticipate right now.
Right.
And in the end, you can't get ahead of that technologically with regulations or legislation. It's going to have to be consumers are going to say enough. And my fear is that
it's IP telephony, which means they're not in the place that the caller ID says they are. They could be in Pakistan, and we'll say they're calling from New Jersey because they own a New Jersey number. Is there any interest in the government in, since that telephony is specifically government regulated, in using the regulatory authority to try to fix that?
Well, most telephony now, I don't know if it's most, but I think most telephony now is now migrated to IP networks, right? So they're outside of the old traditional telco regulation. So I'm not sure that that's the.
It's still delivering the information to you via a regulated service, if you're using a landline phone at least, via a state-regulated monopoly, which is what used to be NYAC is now Verizon here, and what used to be SNET is now, I guess, Frontier in Connecticut.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what kind of scope. I mean, I just in 10 years myself, I think I've had 3 different actual dial tone delivers. I don't even use dial tone anymore. I don't know if I have one, but I don't use it. So I'm not actually sure the answer to that question.
Peter, can I ask a question of Congressman while we have him? One of the concerns for this audience, we all grew up in the direct mail business, is how the U.S. Postal Service is doing, especially since the administration is claiming they're getting insufficient fees from some companies.
Yeah, no, it's a slightly different topic. Quick answer on that is that, yeah, look, the president has declared war on the post office because they make a lot of their money with Amazon, and he really doesn't like Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post. That is not a predicate for a lot of change in regulation or change in the post office. The post office has a big but not as big as it appears problem, right? So part of the cash flow problem the post office has, some of you will be aware of this, is because Congress required that the post office fund its pension plan in a way that no other public pension plans are funded. So as a result, they're making contributions and have had weaker cash flow. So if you loosened the regulation, the command that they basically fully fund their pensions, which nobody else has, their cash flow situation would look a lot better than it is. So that doesn't mean they don't have a problem. Obviously, 15 years ago it was first class mail, today it's parcels. But I think they're around for the foreseeable future. I think proposals to privatize the post offices aren't going anywhere because you still have to have dramatic public subsidy in rural areas and that sort of thing. What we hope is that the post office is hiring lots of innovative people to reduce the cost structure, to make for a more efficient system, and to think about those sort of next generation services, whether it's going back to a postal bank or special delivery for pharmaceuticals that allow it to survive in the future. But it's whatever you hear out of the White House, they're not going away anytime soon.
Congressman, while you're here, a question. What do you think is the appetite, and this might change over time in Congress, to actually punish people who do harm? I mean, you hear Zuckerberg get up there, I'm sorry. Or Wells Fargo gets up there, oh, this was horrible, we're sorry. It won't happen again. But none of these people ever really get punished. Nobody said to Zuckerberg, you know what? You use this data, you have to pay every one of your subscribers $100 because we used your data. There's nothing, there's no teeth to the law. So everybody's going to go on doing this because, yeah, you just say, I'm sorry, and life goes on.
What law did he
It's
violate?
that magic word, accountability and lack thereof. It's pervasive. There is a lack of accountability in today's world.
I mean, look at the financial crisis. How many people went to jail?
The companies didn't pay the hardest fines.
Yeah, if you're asking a question about individual criminal liability, I think the answer is going to be the Wall Street, 2008 example. you're not going to permeate the system with individual criminal or even civil liability to much extent. You know, the coming out of '08, which is not a bad metaphor because everybody got badly hurt, you know, there were massive fines levied on the institutions, billions and billions of dollars of fines, probably not good enough. It should have been, but I think we'll get into that world where, you know, and I mean, look at Wells Fargo, that wasn't so much a data issue, but Wells Fargo is paying through the nose for their irresponsibility. And I do think that the weather has changed. I mean, it took my colleagues. Look, I'm well younger than average in the House of Representatives. So you have an older group of people who, if you watch the senators ask Mark Zuckerberg questions, you realize they weren't using Facebook. Right. They didn't really understand it. So I think over time we're going to evolve to a system of more accountability. But it's not going to be individual criminal or civil liability. It will still be corporate liability.
Well, that's unfortunate, because that's not a penalty. They're spending our money to pay their fines. I mean, that's really pretty much what you're saying. I'd love to do that. The next time I get a traffic ticket, I'd love to compliment.
Yes, the California ballot initiative does have class action built into it. It's getting, by the way, it's worse than GDPR. It's probably worse than the e-privacy.
Can we, since I didn't get that the first time around, what is the California proposed law?
It's basically I guess you could call it GDPR-like, or e-privacy regulation, which is the next generation of European regulation. But there's a ton of problems with it. And in California, it's direct referendum, so if it passes, it's law. Now, granted, there could be a class action lawsuit or injunctions once it becomes law.
And what's the most
but
harmful,
I'll tell you,
what's the most harmful part of it?
All the polling I've seen, it's just shutting down data flows on the altar of permission. And if we sacrifice everything on permission, what do we ever, you guys know what an opt-in rate is versus an opt-out? It's like 2%.
And is this
you're gonna really run our businesses?
Is it just for online data, or is it offline data too?
All data.
It's data.
Okay, so if I wanted to rent the mailing list,
terribly written. It's
it would
short,
only be
you can read it, it's only 21 pages. But it is terrible. And I'm trying to get Kamala Harris to go neutral, and get Gavin Newsom's already said he's going neutral. So trying to, because they know they can read the tea leaves, it's probably going to pass, even though all Silicon Valley is against it. A lot of important corners of society are against it.
Is it okay we can identify what organization you're representing here? Because I'm not sure everyone knows, including the Congressman.
Oh, well, from the Digital Advertising Alliance? Okay. So, we don't lobby, though. We don't lobby. We're just a consumer privacy program. Self-regulation organization. So, but the issue with that law is that, or would be a law, is that it would really effectively shut down data flows that are wonderfully beneficial for society. And by the way, including, there's no even distinctions made for law enforcement. There's no distinctions made for fighting fraud. There's no distinction. It's all one size fits all. Shut it down. Permission.
Well, no,
And are you kidding me? And
no, what's also,
and by the way, the fight is going to be on all the beneficial uses of information. It's not about Facebook or they're not even talking about advertising. They're just going to try to fight this based on all these public.
Yeah.
I
just wanted
I learned a lot, though.
I wanted to thank Congressman who's been incredibly kind to join us, who actually had a perfect out last time when he couldn't join us. He and his office were great about rescheduling this.
Thank you very much.
And we really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
So some of that is legacy, even that Facebook or to keep relationships going with. And by the way, we didn't even talk about all the things that Google and Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, they all have different perspectives and how much they cooperate with the government. The US government makes just as many requests to remove information from the internet as China does. And what Google and you know, with the cooperation these companies do with governments around the world, is, you know, some of it is, in the United States, Twitter insists you give us a subpoena.
When you were out of the room, I mentioned the fact, with something I don't really understand tremendously, but thanks to GDPR, Google is sending more traffic to DoubleClick, which is their own ad network, versus a competing
They
ad network.
initially said we're only going to work with 12 third-party,
Right.
and then you had, you know, I thought, oh my gosh, 12 tribes of Israel, but it was. They've since relaxed that.
Okay.
As more, you know, there's a LumaScape with thousands of companies on it, and you know, everybody's got some influence on the ad supply chain one way or another. Now, can we do more to make sure that ad supply chain is following self-regulation codes? You know, this is what I was talking about earlier about following codes of conduct, whether you're a member of DMA or not. You file Data 2.0, you know, and that's out there to help startups as much as established players. And the whole startup industry, you know, there are more, why startup? There's European jealousy over what's going on in startups and in Silicon Valley and the money that's being made. And this is a global model, and they're using GDPR as a trade ruse to get a cut of the money.
Wow.
And that's what it's about. It's not.
Sounds like a leverage negotiation.
No, honestly, there is privacy is a fundamental human right in Europe. It is not in the United States. So they have a charter that they can regulate against. So there is an argument for that. Plus, honestly, in Europe, there's post-fascism. They've had history with fascism and government misuse of information that influences their laws where we have not had that history.
Are things considered public information here, like real estate transactions and mortgages? Are they private in Europe?
Like you can't get voter rolls in Europe.
Can't get driver rolls, you can't get voter rolls.
I said one size fits all in Europe. They do actually do a distinction between sensitive personal information and other personal information. And things like in America, your political leanings is free, is you can market based on political information. In Europe, you can't. In America, if you're a member of a union, you can market based on your labor affiliations. You can't do that in Europe without higher levels of sexual identity. In America, if you're, gay lesbian market is a booming market right now. In Europe, everything is shut down on gay marketing, and so it has to be done in a more broad stroke. So there's all sorts of things that we allow in this country that Europeans feel differently about. And Europe is not all one mind, too. So I was very honest. You know, when the federal do not call law passed, it was nearly unanimity. And in Europe, this was a close vote on GDPR. So there are a lot of Europeans that did not want this law to go into. There are even big publishers, European publishers. This finances my news organization, this type of advertising, and you're shutting it down. I can't ask people to subscribe and do a paid subscription. They're forcing a business model that doesn't work.
But it's interesting because if you look about which country has the most mail order and the most publishing, Germany. But Germany is very strong on data privacy. How does that work out in real life? They just sacrifice those industries?
Yes, but they're also. They also favor large companies, those laws. So like an Otto Versand or somebody who was back in the day, those organizations can live under GDPR just fine. Matter of fact, it's a nice little hurdle from competition.
Yeah.
And so but ask a small startup in Europe to get going when they can't use data and have to go get permission. Good luck. So think of all the entrepreneurs that happen in this entrepreneurial spirit that get shut down under this situation. And believe me, there are some great European ad tech companies that are really suffering right now. I mean, they're living on the U.S. market.
Hey, Myles, I've been usurping your authority. To close, do you have any closing points you want to make, or?
Well, it's not that close to close, but there's a couple of things I'd like to bring up. I mean, it's been a very interesting discussion today, but we've covered so many topics that I think this is like too broad a topic for one session. My personal opinion on it, I think it just encompasses a tremendous amount of material. The thing that I keep coming back to is something that I said earlier, which now that I think about it, makes a lot of sense, which is there is no one solution to these problems. It's a series of solutions. And I think someone, maybe this group, maybe a subset of this group, should start to participate in putting in what the issues are and what possible solutions are. For example, you don't necessarily, you should be able to very easily have software identify overseas emails and just identify it out to the individual. There are certain areas.
That's technically, in other words.
It's technically very easy to do.
And so it can't be spoofed in the same way caller ID is spoofed?
It'll eliminate a lot. You can't, look, the first thing you have to understand about technology today is you can't eliminate 100% of any issue. That's it. But what you can do is to start to take chunks of the issue out of the pie. So one of them is spoof emails that prey on segments of the population. They do harm. They're not there just as jokes. Those can be minimized. And there are procedures and software that can be written to do that. I think another thing that was brought up today is that there's really no accountability to a lot of the internet service providers that are providing consumers access. Fines are not a good deterrent. All right, now I wouldn't say death by guillotine, though I'm sure you get very positive results, but not a lot of CEOs volunteering for the job. But maybe there needs to be some personal accountability of heads of companies that have the capability to put privacy first and don't. All right? So for example, I've read an awful lot about Equifax breaches. I don't read a lot about Experian breaches. Now, I know Experian a little bit better than Equifax, having worked there for 10 years, and I know their data security. All right? It's tight. Mm-hmm. It is really, really, really tight.
They do.
So if they can do it.
Same thing with TransUnion.
Yeah.
Very tight.
Very tight. So what I'm saying is, if 2 to 3 big boys can do it, and I know that Experian, as they've globally expanded by buying up, no, this is common knowledge, buying up credit bureaus in other parts of the world, sometimes in partnership with local governments, by the way, they're employing the same type of privacy controls. So there are ways to take some action at the corporate level to prevent inroads into financial systems that are detrimental. Now, I'd like to see the government put a set of regulations around that have some really stiff penalties. Now, maybe it's not death by beheading, but that's another thing that can be done, all right?
If I were a hacker today and wanted to implement something like that, my first priority would be to hack and get all of the congressman's personal information out, along with many of his colleagues. You would see legislation passed in 2 weeks.
In about 2 minutes.
Because the Driver's Privacy Protection Act happened because Senator Shelby, when he was a Democrat, his wife he got a Victoria's Secret catalog in his name. His wife was furious.
Oh, yeah.
There was also a lady in California that was killed by a stalker.
That had nothing to do with children's data.
Okay.
The motor vehicle, that law, Driver's Privacy Protection Act, I should say, was also because of the Rebecca Schaefer actress killed.
Right.
And it was, ironically, it was because the private investigations industry, he hired a private eye to get the data on where she lived. So what wonderful law gets passed through Congress? The Driver's Privacy Protection Act, which shuts down auto insurers, after parts manufacturers.
Yeah, they go overboard. They
well, wait a minute,
overprotect.
I'm done yet. Guess who got an exemption? Private investigation.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So you're not going to get, this is the kind of craziness that happens, the Polly Klaas kidnapping. her husband, the father went on a diatribe against children's data, and we have a Children's Data Protection Act. But the point being, it had nothing to do with the crime being committed, but we get conflated. The Video Privacy Protection Act shut down Bork. That was because of Bork, journalism and Bork, shuts down marketing uses of video data. I mean, we live with the ramifications of not what we do with information, but what other people are doing with information.
But you're
Which is
focusing on-
why we need strong self-regulatory codes and enforcement of those codes as proof points. So when these laws come up on the Hill or legislation, we have a game plan to either prevent legislation or at least codify what we do.
So the point that Myles made, I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I want to
in terms of
deconstruct it.
In terms of having,
We're saying the
So
same thing.
we need. I
We're
don't
saying
know
the
whether
same thing.
European is emailing me right now.
So
I need to know
but
that.
the question is,
For
what
GDPR
kind of a
purposes.
structure can you put together that is essentially very, very independent and would create these ideas that seemingly does not have obvious bias? And who are you speaking to? And who are you representing?
I think you have to go two different pathways, at least initially. I think one, you have to go to the government, because I think they should be kept aware of what's going on and how we're approaching the problem. All right, which is very much different than the way the government tends to approach problem solving. The government, for whatever reason, all right, likes to take big global views of things. And that's just not reality, because if you try to put your arms around the entire security privacy situation, you end up getting overwhelmed. But if you start to take small cuts, like let's protect from foreign emails, let's deal with something about intrusion into our financial and credit files, and you sort of deconstruct it down to those levels, and what you do is you rank them based on their impact to consumers. All right? Because if you don't satisfy the consumers, the businesses don't have anybody to sell to. The consumers are the buyers. So, and you don't make them onerous, you make them proactive, saying we're doing this to protect you. I don't think anybody will ever get pissed off, excuse the expression, if I want to suppress emails.
What kind of an idea, Myles, do you have to start this off? How would you get it going?
To me, I would treat it like any other consulting project. I put a scope together and start to elicit the data that's necessary to rank the options. And the options are almost like ranked on two criteria. What's their impact financially on consumers, all right? And the other one would be what's the ease or difficulty on some sort of a scale of being able to implement them. And that type of a quadrant analysis will allow you to start to flush out what the various points are, and you're going to take a look at those like anything. Here's the low-hanging fruit. What's the low-hanging fruit? Pretty easy to implement and can make a significant difference to both consumers and businesses.
Tom brings up a good point, though, in terms of finding that independent entity that has the unbiased stature to launch such a code of ethics.
I think we put together a position paper and start marketing that.
Trade associations.
Trade associations, maybe.
That's what trade association is supposed to do.
Is that the new DMA, or is it?
Well, DMA's Data 2.0 is the update to the original Code of Ethical Business Practice that they had for.
The DMA was just bought by the ANA, so you got a big, powerful trade organization that, you know, communicates with members in every part of the industry.
And they acquired DMA because of the data chops. I mean, this is this is actually a, you know, I call it David Ogilvy's dream. He wanted brands to pay attention to data.
Absolutely.
And this is why ANA took on DMA.
He bought my first company because of that.
Yeah, but if anybody in the CPG business says big data one more time, I'm gonna get ill. Because the only people are the people in this room, quite frankly. You didn't grow up in a direct-to-consumer business. You really have no, it's just an ad age story. I mean, it's just fun. I'm just quite frankly, a little frustrated with, big data. I'm now starting to communicate to my clients little data, data that's actionable, data that is something that we can use, and this is specifically how we can use it. Just to kind of leverage the big data, which is the phrase of the year.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean,
It isn't to you and to us who use it. To the CPG industry, trust me, they're talking of big data at Con, I don't want to hear it.
well, now take big data from a direct marketer's perspective. You're just bringing in real-time data from mobile devices, from social media, and you're using it.
It's an industry that knows how to use it. is my point.
Exactly. Google didn't invent analytics. We all know at this table, analytics.
We're around.
But AI and machines are helping us be better analyzers of data, and we should recognize that fact. And the fact that Adobe wants to build this information data platform and other companies like it, it's because they understand all that beautiful little data combined with mobile and other triggers is really what we need today as smart direct marketers to make more
Is that
real-time
the reason?
decision
I
making.
thought the reason Adobe was going down the path is because they hired my daughter.
Well, she's probably one smart lady.
All right, so I want to do a little, we are coming to the close, but I want to do a little informal survey, but I'd like everybody here to be honest, okay?
No.
No, come on, in the interest of honesty.
Just like we are.
How's this voting in the
And we're the only ones.
How
that
many
used it.
here have had an instance of fraud related to data?
Yeah.
You haven't?
No, shocking.
They've never,
Okay. I
never
haven't, but I'm aware
been
of
told you.
But I have to say,
I've had
how
my
many have had
identities- well, not my
how many
identities
have
stolen, but
done
it's never been
interaction with your
fraud.
credit card or bank where you were impressed that they were watching
Oh,
the
yeah.
store?
Amex always.
Yeah.
I gotta tell you, I had two frauds. I mean, just to tell you about it, I mean, I'm glad the congressman isn't here for this. I've had two cases of credit card theft, and they both took place in the DMV in New York State. At the Department of Motor Vehicles.
I mean, they took your,
They took my
somebody,
credit.
an employee or somebody.
Yeah, I put in a credit card transaction twice, 2 separate years. And they both got copied at the DMV, and American Express found them.
Well, the government
Because
is,
one of the cards that was the first use of the card.
government is one of the worst guardians of data. Just personal experience, I once got a letter from the state tax department in Connecticut where the second page of the letter was to a different taxpayer, but it had his social security number on it. And that means that guy got my social security number. And there's no accountability. I asked my accountant, he said, wait till the audit's over. Then you can complain. But the people aren't gonna complain because they think it's.
And
using us to
GDPR
do
is
it.
creating privacy nightmares because now we deal with data for consumers and segments, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're being forced to do individual lookups into our data about you so we can tell you what we have on you.
I think it's a business
It
opportunity.
is, great,
I'm gonna develop a
good,
model.
and have a
That'll
run of it,
project
but I don't
high
want
risk.
government telling me it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare.
All
right, folks.
Looks like we're breaking, I didn't mention we did video, this, anybody's on, is that okay?
Shut me down.
Oh, we did video.
Talk to my agent and get a
Okay.
release.
I'll be honest, I'll send it to Peter and we'll have it happen. Do you wanna do, either of you wanna do a talk?
After I drop the ladder, I'm doing it.
Okay.
Oh, man.
You wanna do a talk? I'm not sure I know you. Let me turn this off, by the way.